She warned me not to fall for her, but how do you stop a heart that's already decided? I didn't expect much that afternoon. Just another casual visit to my friend's house, games, small talk, maybe a few jokes over pizza. Nothing unusual. But the moment I stepped inside, I felt the shift before I even understood it. She appeared at the end of the hallway, wiping her hands on a soft white dish towel, her dark hair loosely tied back, a few strands falling carelessly around her face. She wasn't trying to be impressive, and maybe that's why she was. There was a quiet elegance in the way she carried herself, not loud, not flashy, just a kind of calm presence that filled the space without effort. "Hey, you must be Daniel's friend," she said, her voice smooth, touched with warmth. I managed a polite nod, but my chest tightened in a way I hadn't felt before. It wasn't just that she was beautiful, though she was. It was something in her eyes, steady, intelligent, with the kind of depth you only notice when someone has lived enough to understand silence. I shook her hand briefly, and it was a small thing, just a polite greeting, but her touch lingered with me long after she pulled away. She smelled faintly of lavender and something softer, like fresh laundry, and for a second I forgot to let go. As my friend rushed upstairs to grab something, she stayed in the kitchen, asking me simple questions, how my classes were going, what I was studying. Nothing remarkable, yet I felt myself hanging on every word. Her laugh when I told a clumsy story about being late to a lecture felt like it landed somewhere deeper than it should have. I told myself it was harmless. She was just being kind, welcoming. But there was a flicker in her eyes, a brief pause between words, as if she was aware too, and trying not to let it show. When my friend came back, the air shifted again, like a curtain being drawn. She smiled at me, polite, distant now, and slipped back into her role as just his mom. But as I followed him upstairs, I couldn't shake the image of her standing there, sunlight filtering through the kitchen window, her expression soft but unreadable. I knew I shouldn't think about it. I knew it was dangerous. But even then, in that first encounter, something in me had already started to fall. Over the next few weeks, the little moments began to add up. Nothing dramatic, nothing anyone else would notice, but I did. It started in the kitchen. She'd ask if I wanted a drink while I waited for my friend, her voice carrying that soft rise at the end that made even the simplest question feel personal. I'd thank her, and our fingers would almost touch when she handed me the glass. That almost was enough to keep me awake later, replaying it in my head as if it meant more than it should. We spoke about ordinary things, my classes, her garden, the weather, yet every word seemed layered. When she laughed at my clumsy jokes, she tilted her head slightly, her hair slipping across her cheek, and I wanted to memorize that exact angle of light against her face. She wasn't trying to impress me, but that made her presence even more impossible to ignore. Sometimes I caught her looking at me before she realized I'd noticed. It was never long, just a second too many before she looked away, busying herself with folding a towel or wiping the counter. But that second held a quiet current neither of us dared acknowledge. I began to see her differently than the world did. My friend called her strict, said she worried too much. But I saw the softer edges, the way her shoulders relaxed after a long day, the sigh she didn't think anyone heard as she sat down with her cup of tea. She wasn't just his mom. She was a woman who carried her life with a kind of grace most people overlook. Once, when I offered to help carry groceries from the car, she smiled in a way that felt different, appreciative, but also surprised, as though no one had thought to lighten her load before. My arm brushed hers when we set the bags down, and though it was barely a touch, it felt like a spark. I told myself it was harmless. That I was reading too much into gestures that meant nothing. But when I lay in bed at night, I remembered her laugh, the way her eyes softened when she listened, the faint scent of her perfume lingering after she left the room. These weren't accidents. Or maybe they were, but either way, the truth was there, quiet but undeniable. With every small conversation, with every glance that lingered longer than it should, I felt myself being pulled deeper into something neither of us had spoken aloud. It was a quiet evening, the kind where time feels slower. My friend had stepped out to run an errand, leaving me in the living room with her. The house felt unusually still, only the faint hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the clock filling the silence. She sat across from me, legs tucked neatly beneath her, a soft cardigan draped over her shoulders. At first, the conversation was light, harmless things about books, her favorite movies, how she used to travel before life got too busy. I found myself watching her hands as she spoke, the way her fingers curled around her mug, graceful even in small movements. But beneath the warmth of our exchange, something else lingered, a tension neither of us named. There was a pause, and then she set her mug down, looking directly at me for what felt like the first time without her usual shield of casualness. Her eyes softened, but her voice carried quiet weight. "Don't fall for me," she said gently. The words caught me off guard. They weren't said harshly, not like a rule being enforced, but more like a plea, a warning meant to protect us both. I should have laughed it off, brushed it away as unnecessary. But instead, my chest tightened, because it was already too late. I tried to keep my expression steady, not wanting to reveal the storm inside me. But the air between us grew heavier. The meaning behind her words was clear, she had felt the same flicker, the same pull. And she was trying to stop it before it could burn too brightly. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The clock ticked louder, the room seemed smaller. She looked away, her jaw tightening slightly as if she regretted letting the words slip. She folded her hands in her lap, drawing her cardigan closer, as though wrapping herself in the safety of distance. I forced a smile, nodding as if I understood. "Of course," I murmured. But the truth was written all over my silence. I had already crossed that invisible line long before she said the words. When my friend returned, the spell broke. She rose quickly, smoothing her hair, slipping back into the easy role of mother. But as she passed by me, her sleeve brushed against my arm, and it was enough to confirm what her words had tried to deny: the feelings were real, and now they had a name. After that night, we didn't speak about her warning again. She never repeated it, and I never challenged it. Instead, what grew between us was quieter, woven into ordinary acts that anyone else would overlook. One evening, I noticed a faucet dripping endlessly in the kitchen. Without thinking, I offered to fix it. She hesitated at first, then smiled softly, handing me a small wrench from the drawer. As I crouched down, I felt her presence behind me, the faint rustle of her cardigan, the warmth of her watching. When I finally stopped the leak, her hand briefly touched my shoulder, just a light squeeze of gratitude. It lasted only a second, but my skin burned long after. She had her ways of returning the care. Sometimes, when my friend and I stayed late into the evening, she would set an extra plate at the table before we even asked. "I thought you might be hungry," she'd say casually, but the way her eyes flicked to mine told me it wasn't thoughtless, it was deliberate, for me. There were accidents, too. Passing dishes across the table, her fingers brushing against mine. Walking through a doorway at the same time, her hand pressing lightly against my arm to guide me past. Small, simple moments that left traces no one else could see but me. One afternoon, I slipped slightly on the porch step when it rained. Before I could steady myself, her hand was there, firm on my forearm, steadying me with surprising strength. Our eyes locked for a heartbeat. Her breath caught, and I felt the warmth of her touch pulse through me. She let go too quickly, but I carried that imprint with me for days. And then there were the little things I didn't even realize mattered until later. A folded blanket left on the couch for me. A mug of tea set down beside my books while I studied. The faint scent of her perfume that sometimes clung to my shirt after a brief hug goodbye. These weren't grand gestures. They weren't declarations. But together they built a quiet intimacy, an invisible thread tugging us closer every day. She never said the words, and neither did I. But in every quiet act of care, we both admitted what we were too cautious to confess out loud. And that silence, tender, heavy, unspoken, felt louder than anything else in the room. It happened late one evening, almost by accident. My friend had gone to bed early, leaving the house unusually quiet. I lingered in the living room, half watching a muted TV screen, when she walked in carrying a cup of chamomile tea. She hesitated at the doorway, then, instead of retreating, sat down on the opposite end of the couch. For a while, we didn't talk. The dim lamp cast soft shadows across her face, and I could see how tired she looked, not just physically, but in the way her shoulders carried something heavier than the day's weight. Finally, she broke the silence. "You know," she began, her voice lower, almost thoughtful, "sometimes I wonder when I stopped being seen." I turned toward her, unsure what she meant. She gave a faint laugh, though it didn't reach her eyes. "Most people only see me as a mother now. The one who cooks, cleans, worries, fixes problems. And that's fine, but it's like the rest of me just disappeared somewhere along the way." Her words sank into me. I had never thought of her that way, as invisible. To me, she was anything but. I wanted to tell her how every detail about her stood out to me, the way she brushed her hair back when she was concentrating, the way her voice softened when she cared. But instead, I asked quietly, "Do you miss it? Being seen is more than that?" She looked at me then, really looked, as though deciding whether she could trust me with her truth. "Yes," she whispered. "Sometimes more than I should admit." The confession hung between us, heavy and fragile. I felt something inside me shift, a need to answer her honesty with my own. I leaned forward slightly, my hands clasped together to steady myself. "I don't think you've disappeared," I said. "If anything, I've never noticed anyone the way I notice you." Her lips parted as if to respond, but no words came. The silence stretched, filled with the thrum of my heartbeat. For a moment, it felt like the entire world had narrowed to the space between us. She leaned back, her eyes shining with something unspoken, longing, maybe fear, maybe both. I didn't move closer, though every part of me wanted to. The air was charged, alive with everything we weren't saying. That night, nothing more happened. But the honesty we had shared left a mark. We couldn't go back to casual smiles and harmless jokes. We had stepped past that, into something deeper, and both of us knew it. The weight of what we hadn't said kept building after that night. Every glance, every accidental brush of skin, every pause in conversation felt louder than words. I carried it in my chest like a secret that burned, waiting for a moment to escape. That moment came one evening when the house was unusually still. My friend had stepped out with others, leaving just the two of us again. She was in the kitchen, rinsing dishes, the sound of water filling the silence. I stood in the doorway, watching her in the soft glow of the overhead light. The sleeves of her sweater were pushed up, her hair loose around her shoulders, and she looked both strong and vulnerable at once. When she noticed me, she smiled faintly. "You don't have to hover," she teased gently. But her tone was softer than usual, like she didn't really want me to go. I stepped closer, my pulse unsteady. "I'm not hovering," I said quietly. "I just don't want this moment to end." Her hands stilled under the water. Slowly, she turned off the tap and faced me. Her eyes searched mine, cautious but open. I could see the conflict in her, the urge to push me away battling with the truth she could no longer hide. "Don't," she whispered, shaking her head slightly, her voice carrying both warning and pleading. "Don't do this. We can't," but the words were out before I could stop them, a truth too heavy to contain. "I already did." Her breath caught, sharp and quiet, as if I'd broken something fragile. For a long second, she didn't move. Then, almost reluctantly, her gaze softened. I didn't rush toward her. I didn't dare. Instead, I stood there, letting the honesty settle between us. She closed her eyes briefly, exhaling as though she'd been holding her breath for weeks. When she opened them again, her expression had changed. Her hand moved, slow, deliberate, until her fingertips brushed against mine. Just the lightest touch, but it felt like fire racing through my skin. You don't know what you're saying, she murmured, though her hand didn't pull away. Yes, I said, my voice steady now. I do. The world outside seemed to vanish, the ticking clock, the hum of the fridge, everything. All that existed was the warmth of her hand against mine, the silent confession in her eyes, and the truth that could no longer be hidden. For a long moment, we didn't move. Her hand rested against mine, light and trembling, as if even that small contact was too much. Yet neither of us pulled away. The silence between us wasn't empty anymore, it was full, heavy with everything we had admitted without words. Finally, she let out a shaky breath, the faintest smile tugging at her lips. You make things complicated, you know that? Her tone was soft, without accusation, more like a weary truth she couldn't deny. I shook my head slowly. No, I said quietly. I think my heart just stopped asking permission. Her eyes flickered at that, something breaking through, relief, fear, and the kind of longing she had tried to bury for too long. She sat down on the couch, her shoulders slumping, and for the first time she seemed less like the untouchable figure I had met weeks ago and more like a woman carrying a secret of her own. I hesitated, then sat beside her, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from her. She didn't move away. Instead, after a moment, she leaned the slightest bit toward me, her head finding its place against my shoulder. It was such a small gesture, but it carried the weight of surrender. My arm lifted almost instinctively, wrapping gently around her. I didn't hold her tightly, just enough to let her know she wasn't alone. Her hair brushed against my chin, carrying that faint lavender scent that always lingered in my memory. Neither of us spoke. Words felt unnecessary, even dangerous.